Okay, let's dive right into an explainer that honestly feels like a Hollywood political thriller, but I promise you, it's entirely true. Picture this. You're born into the absolute highest echelons of society. You have every privilege imaginable handed to you on a silver platter. And then, you risk all of it. Literally everything. Just to give a voice to the voiceless. You've got to wonder, why would someone do that? What drives a person to completely tear down the very system that benefits them the most?
So today, we're exploring the life of Heo Kyun. He was a 16th century Korean scholar, and his literary rebellion led him straight to a pretty brutal execution. Now, if you're not super familiar with the incredibly rigid social structures of Korea's Joseon dynasty, buckle up, because this story is going to blow your mind. Heo Kyun wasn't just a politician. He was an elite scholar, an early adopter of global ideas, and a total visionary who firmly believed that your actual talent mattered way more than the circumstances of your birth. Born in 1569, this guy was quite literally the golden child of the Joseon dynasty. We're talking about a tremendously prestigious literary family. His dad was a high-ranking official, his siblings were celebrated writers, and Heo Kyun himself, a total child prodigy. He was writing poetry by the time he was 9, and he rapidly passed the incredibly grueling civil service exams at the exceptionally young age of 25. To put that into perspective, the average age for passing those exams was late 30s. So yeah, he was an absolute superstar. He had it made.
Which brings us to Section 1, Scandals, Outcasts, and Ideals. So, despite this elite, golden spoon pedigree, Heo Kyun was fundamentally at odds with his era. He was living in a profoundly rigid system. The Joseon dynasty was strictly governed by this unyielding Confucian moral code that basically dictated everything, from your social class down to your everyday behavior. But Heo Kyun, he went totally against the grain. He openly embraced banned or marginalized belief systems like Buddhism and Taoism. While state Confucianism demanded you suppress personal desires for duty, he argued, hey, human desires and emotions, they're completely natural.
There's this one quote that brilliantly illustrates his whole mindset. I will follow heaven rather than the sages. Basically, he's declaring that human nature, which is given by heaven, is infinitely more important than these man-made moral codes created by ancient sages. And, as you might guess, this unapologetic, defiant philosophy got him fired from government posts, multiple times. In one crazy instance, just months after getting appointed as a magistrate, he was impeached. Why? For holding Buddhist ceremonies and mingling with the quote-unquote wrong crowds. And speaking of those wrong crowds, instead of just rubbing elbows with the elite, he totally scandalized the royal courts by forming deep, genuine friendships with society's outcasts. A crucial group he really championed were the Seoeol. These were the illegitimate children of noblemen. Legally, they were treated as second-class citizens, permanently barred from ever holding public office, no matter how brilliant they were. He also deeply respected Buddhist monks and had these profound intellectual friendships with courtesan artists, known as gisengs. To Heo Kyun, these people weren't outcasts at all. They were his intellectual equals. On top of all that, he was a massive early adopter of global culture. During these diplomatic trips to Ming China in 1614 and 1615, he didn't just clock in and do his official duties. No, he scoured the local markets and brought back these radical foreign items, things like Western world maps and Catholic prayer books. He was just constantly looking beyond the narrow, strict borders of Joseon ideology, always seeking broader truths about the world and human equality.
All right, let's move into Section 2. Editing the Gukja season.
So you might be wondering, how did all this empathy for the marginalized and this huge thirst for a broader worldview actually manifest? Let's look at his literary career to see how these ideals culminated in his absolute masterpiece. Now, he's very famously known for writing Korea's first novel, Hongil-dong Jeon, which is an epic story about an illegitimate son turning into a righteous outlaw. But actually, his curation of a poetry anthology called the Gukul-sosan was just as revolutionary. Honestly, maybe even more dangerous. He became a true pioneer of literary criticism, and this specific book was his ultimate rebellious statement.
When he was compiling the Gukjo Shisen, he brought together 888 poems from 35 different Joseon poets. But here is the kicker. Instead of only featuring elite noblemen, he intentionally published the brilliant poetry of society's outcasts right alongside them. He literally placed the verses of Buddhist monks, lower-class scholars, and even female courtesans on the exact same pages as the highest ministers of the state. And he added his own critical commentary to each one, praising their artistic merit entirely regardless of who wrote them. By doing this, he effectively immortalized their voices. He firmly believed that artistic talent, and really divine truth, do not discriminate based on your social class. He wrote that casting aside brilliant minds simply because of how they were born was a crime against heaven. Plus, it was just a massive loss for the country. So by editing the Guk Joseon, he was using literature as this incredibly powerful tool to elevate the oppressed. He was proving to the elites that genius could be found in the absolute lowest rungs of society.
Now we arrive at Section 3, Treason and Tragic Downfall. Unfortunately, challenging the social hierarchy and demanding equality back in the Joseon dynasty was a highly dangerous game. A deadly one, really. And Heo Kyun was about to pay the ultimate price. In 1613, there was a massive political purge. Several of Heo Kyun's closest friends, those brilliant illegitimate scholars he admired so much, were accused of treason and brutally executed. Terrified for his own life, Heo Kyun made a desperate, fateful decision. He allied himself with the ruthless Daebuk political faction. Yep, the very people in power. He did it just to survive the bloodbath. From there, his path was just a rapid, chaotic escalation. After joining that ruling faction, he climbed the ranks super fast, reaching the really high position of left state counselor by 1617. But man, he was playing a dangerous game of political survival. His aggressive maneuvers, like pushing for the deposition of the Queen Dowager just to appease his new allies, well, they ended up making him some incredibly powerful, deeply bitter enemies. The absolute breaking point finally came in 1618. An anonymous, highly treasonous poster was nailed to the Namdaemun Gate in the capital. And his political rivals? They immediately pounced. They framed Heo Kyun as the mastermind behind the whole poster, straight up accusing him of plotting a rebellion to overthrow the king. The trap snapped shut. Despite his frantic protest that he was innocent, and despite his really high standing at the time, he was caught in a political web that he just couldn't escape. His long history of defying norms, associating with outcasts, and challenging the status quo, it made him the absolute perfect scapegoat. The king became completely convinced of his guilt and ordered his immediate execution. In August of 1618, Heo Kyun suffered the horrific fate of death by dismemberment. It was a visceral, haunting, and truly tragic conclusion to a life spent fighting a rigid system. The golden child, who had tried to rewrite the rules of his society, was quite literally torn apart by it in the mud of the execution grounds. Immediately after his death, the state tried to completely erase him from history. They ordered all his physical works to be destroyed. But they couldn't erase his literary legacy. The Guk Joseon, that beautiful, rebellious anthology of marginalized voices, was secretly preserved by people who understood its true value. And then, nearly 80 years later, a scholar named Park Tae-soon gathered the surviving manuscripts and republished them. This ensured that Heo Kyun's vision and the voices of the outcasts he championed lived on forever. Heo Kyun died for his visionary belief that true talent transcends social status. Where his society only saw illegitimacy and low birth, he saw pure brilliance. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a powerful question that absolutely still resonates centuries later. If talent truly knows no class, whose brilliant voices might we be unknowingly silencing in our own modern world today? Think about that. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible piece of history with me. Keep questioning and keep learning.